Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about John Wick Chapter 4, which is the next film from Chad Stahelski, starring of course Keanu Reeves as the title character, along with so many other great cast members as an addition to this series. And this is a film that I was very excited for, but not nearly as excited as some other people were because, you know, these John Wick sequels, I love all three of these movies. I own all three on Blu-ray, but the second and the third one definitely did lose the heart and the more character-driven story that the first one had, and so I wasn't expecting that from this movie. And what completely took me off guard in this film is the fact that it is a much more personal story for John Wick than I was really expecting, and of course it was that epic and insane action movie that was promised from Chad Stahelski with a 2-hour and 40-minute long John Wick movie, and it honestly might just be my favorites of the series. I definitely think the first one might be a better movie, but this one just had everything that you would want from a John Wick film, and so this will be a spoiler review for this film. So if you've not seen this movie, I highly recommend to check this one out in theaters because it is just an insanely well-crafted film that really does show that they put so much money into this film, and everybody involved with it brought their all, and it really is the pinnacle of this series, and I truly don't believe that they can possibly top it in any way. So let's just get into this thing. What is John Wick Chapter 4 about? Well, essentially it follows a revenge tale once again with John Wick trying to get revenge against the High Table because of the events of the last film. His friend Winston has betrayed him, he shot him off that building, and he really has lost pretty much everything at this point. He even lost his wedding ring in the last movie, and he lost just any sort of resemblance of who he was in that first movie. The duality of John and John Wick has been nearly severed at this point, from being free of this world to being pulled back into it. And this film firmly brings back that personal stakes with this character because it's not just about him trying to get revenge on the High Table. Winston, pulls him off on the side towards the beginning of this movie and says, how far will you go? How many people are you going to have to kill to try to get revenge against this High Table? Because they're just going to keep on replacing them. It's going to be an endless thing where at some point you're going to lose your soul. You're going to completely lose who you were when you got out of this place. And is this what your wife would want you to become? Is this what you want to become? Are you going to die as John Wick, or are you going to die as John? And this is a great way to pit his character and this conflict within himself that is going to be the driving force of this entire movie, which again, that personal stakes in that first film was the reason why that first film is so good. And yes, you get a lot of great action sequences, and throughout the second and the third movie you get more into the lore and the world building of this universe, but now we've brought it back to the personal stakes which made this series so special in the first place. And the movie really knows how to set the stakes for this film right off the bat, because you're introduced to the new villain of this series being played by Bill Skarsgård, who is playing this character called MARQUIS, and Bill Skarsgård knows how to play characters like this. He is a slimy, just miserable person. You want John Wick to get revenge on this guy so bad because of the stakes set at the beginning of the movie, because he lures in Winston and Lance Reddick's character, and sadly enough, he actually kills CHARON at the beginning of this movie, which of course, if you know, the actor Lance Reddick actually passed away last week tragically, and to see him die in this movie as well, which is absolutely heartbreaking to see. But this loss is kind of the other driving force of this movie that can get John Wick's character to realize that his revenge tour is not only affecting him and the people that he's killing, it's affecting the people he actually cares about. It's affecting his friends like Winston and like Lance Reddick's character, who is also lost in this movie, and it is kind of the looming shadow over the film, and this loss kind of increases the drive of this character and your emotional investment in this character because of how this movie sets you up to really hate this villain right at the beginning. And so really you only get 2 returning cast members in this film. Of course you have Winston, played by McShane, and of course you have Laurence Fishburne returning in this movie as the King, but they're kind of more smaller roles, and you get introduced to a lot more different assassins in this world. It really spends a lot of time developing these new characters, which I think this movie brilliantly spends its time, because it is a 2-hour and 40-minute long movie, and the structure of this film, the way that it introduces these people and makes you care about all these new characters, is truly impressive. And so after the death of CHARON and the destruction of the New York Continental, John Wick needs to seek out some more allies of his in Japan, being played by Hiroyuki Sanada, and his daughter being played by Rina Sawayama, and these are the characters that run this Continental Hotel in Japan. And of course, with John Wick coming to their doorstep, he's going to bring a bunch of death and destruction behind him because of the fact that the High Table really wants him dead. They're going to send this guy played by Donnie Yen, who is playing this character called CAINE, who is a blind badass, who is also a friend of John Wick's. And this is also a great thing about this movie, is you get to find a bunch of history between all of these characters, between Donnie Yen, Keanu Reeves, and Hiroyuki Sanada. They were all friends in the past, and it builds up these relationships relationships to the point where you care about all three of these characters so much and you don't want them to hurt each other. But of course, CAINE's character has the threat of his daughter put upon her life, and so he is working with the High Table out of fear that he's going to become into a situation that John Wick was in that first film where his family is killed. And what is he going to become because he tried to get out of this business? Now he's being pulled back into it, and so you're pitting friends against each other. And so when all this stuff goes down in Japan and you get this amazing action sequence, you care about these characters. And it does a smart thing of really focusing in on Hiroyuki Sanada and his daughter's character and seeing how great they are in the action sequences, because of course you're going to get a lot of action with John Wick later on in this 2-hour and 40-minute runtime. You get a limited amount of time with these characters, so you really get to see how capable they are and how cool these characters are. I want to see a lot more with Rina Sawayama. She really impressed me in this film, but of course Hiroyuki Sanada is a standout in any movie he is in, and he gets wasted a lot of the times in American films where he's either killed off right away or he has a short little action sequence. He was also in Lost, and he was great in his role in that series, but he was also seemingly kind of wasted in that show. But this movie does not waste his talents whatsoever. You get an amazing fight sequence with him, working with the guns, doing the gun fu that the John Wicks have made famous in these 4 films now. And so you get to see Hiroyuki Sanada do all this great action stuff in this world. He has a great sword fights with Donnie Yen's character. And again, the history behind these people, Donnie Yen really does not want to kill these people. He is being forced to. All he wants to do is kill John Wick to save his daughter. He has a reason to fight for his life. He has a reason to fight for his family. And so he's willing to do all these things, but he doesn't want to kill Hiroyuki Sanada. But he also knows that if he doesn't try to defend his hotel, when it comes to Hiroyuki Sanada's character, if he doesn't defend his hotel, if he doesn't try to fight Donnie Yen and try to stop him, the High Table is going to come down and kill him anyway. And so you get the situation where Donnie Yen wins this fight, CAINE wins this fight, but of course, him being a father, he basically steps up and says, you cannot leave, you have to finish this, or else the High Table is going to kill us because you didn't do your job. And so, unfortunately, Hiroyuki Sanada's character is killed, and that also drives John Wick even more, kind of hammering home that point that all these people that he cares about are dying around him, and how far is he willing to go? How many people is he willing to let die for him before he realizes what he's done, and before he can try to get out himself and try to stop all this madness from happening. And when it comes to pretty much all the action sequences in this movie, when you think it's going to be over, it keeps on going. It takes one more step forward. It takes like 5 more steps forward. When you get to see John Wick taking out all these people with the nunchuck, it is awesome, and you think that sequence is over, but then Donnie Yen goes to confront him, and you get this awesome fight sequence between these two friends that has this history behind them and this care behind them. And so every single action sequence, it kind of plays in a similar formula throughout this entire movie, where you're invested into these characters. You get to see this tension being built by either the characters, by the plots, or by whatever situation they're in, and the action sequence starts and it keeps on going and going and going, getting more insane and topping itself throughout every single sequence of each fight within itself. And then it ends on a very satisfying way of John Wick escaping this place, where you're also introduced to another character in this movie who is the Tracker, or Mr. Nobody, as he has come to know in this movie. And this is a guy that also is trying to kill John Wick, but he is a character who wants to get the most money out of it. So essentially, he's kind of an ally to John Wick towards the beginning of this movie, because if John Wick dies at the beginning, the bounty is only like $10 or $15 million, and so he wants to bring that all the way up to $60 million. That is his goal, so he's going to try to keep John Wick alive for as long as possible before he himself can take him out for the money. And so at this point, John Wick needs to figure out a way to get out of this situation, because he's realized that at some point he is going to die. The High Table is going to keep on throwing people at him, and he really just has one more target left, and that is Bill Skarsgård's character. So Winston brings up this way that he can do a duel against this character in an old school way in this world, where you can challenge somebody to a one-on-one duel if you're a part of the High Table. If he can be reintegrated with his family, he can challenge MARQUIS to that duel. And this leads to probably my favorite sequence in the entire movie, which is everything that happens in Germany. And you think this is going to be some side quest in a video game, because of course this movie operates a lot like a video game. You have John Wick killing people, grabbing their ammunition, and then moving on to the next guy to kill, and he kind of rinse and repeats, and the way the action works feels very much like a video game in the best possible way. And so at this point of the story, you get this little side quest to be redeemed by your family, which is also a very important thing, because this is a storyline that was undid in the third movie. His family life was lost to him, and so kind of redeeming himself in this way kind of completes that arc as well. But it feels kind of like a side quest in a video game, where like, okay, our main mission is to do this duel, but before we can do the duel, you have to go to your family, and before you can be redeemed by your family, you have to kill this guy who has wronged the family to be able to redeem yourself in the eyes of said family. And so you get introduced to this very slimy penguin-esque character played by Scott Adkins, brilliantly, by the way. This is actually probably one of my favorite performances in this movie because, again, you're introduced to this brand new character they haven't met before, but there's history behind this character and John Wick, and there's history with how he plays this role and this nightclub that he has formed around himself, and he's just such a slimy character. And of course, the situation gets even more over the top because Mr. Nobody shows up at this point, and Donnie Yen's character, CAINE, also shows up at this point, and they play a game of poker that is very, very intense. And like I said, before every single crazy action set piece, you get either a great moment building character tensions, or you get great moments building just in general suspense between every single sequence. And this is a very, very suspenseful sequence when you're waiting for John Wick to take those cards and throw it at the Penguin character and just try to take out all these guys and try to kill this guy in order to redeem himself for his family. And so this spirals out of control, and you get another great action sequence where you get to see kind of the tracker Donnie Yen and John Wick kind of working together in a certain way against this one guy, and it's a very, very entertaining sequence. And like I said, each action sequence you think it's going to end here, but it takes another step forward and another step forward, and it just gets absolutely insane. And Scott Adkins is a badass in this film. This character is so threatening. He's such a big guy. He's an imposing force to go against, and when he is finally killed, it is so incredibly satisfying. That last hit against the concrete that his character takes was funny in a way because of how ridiculously over the top these action sequences can be, and it was just incredibly entertaining. And so now that he is redeemed, he's once again a part of this family, and Bill Skarsgård, John Wick, Winston, and Donnie Yen's character also meet up in this place across from the Eiffel Tower to plan out this duel, to set the rules and set the stage for what's going to happen. And this leads to one of the most insane action sequences I've ever seen on film. This is the reason why you see this movie in theaters, because after the duel is set and John Wick has to get to this place in Paris by sunrise, the Bill Skarsgård's character sets a bunch of bounties on John Wick, and all these assassins are trying to stop him before he can get to this place by sunrise. And at this point, I had a kill counter on my phone just sneakily by my side, and I was kind of trying to guess how many kills John Wick was getting throughout this movie. And at this point, it was honestly kind of low considering we were getting into the third act of the film. I think I was probably around 60 at this point. And in terms of John Wick movie, that's close to the kills in the first movie, but it's about half of the kills in the second movie. And so I was like, okay, this needs to step up at a certain point. And so this entire sequence in Paris is insane. So of course it starts off with Winston and the king kind of giving him the guns that he's going to need to be able to go through all this situation. He's walking through the streets of Paris and have this character on a radio station kind of updating his location for all the other assassins to know exactly where he is. And it starts with this hand-to-hand combat sequence on the street. He eventually gets into this car, and it becomes a melee sequence where he's fighting hand-to-hand combat in a car. And I can say that to you, and I can try to describe this fight sequence as how he's using a car to punch people, essentially, and it's kind of insane. I want to coin it as car fu, where he had the gun fu in the past 3 films. This is straight up car fu. It's kind of insane, but then he drives off after this sequence, and it leads to the crazy thing around that roundabout in Paris that is so famous and iconic as a location in different movies. And again, you see this place in the Mission Impossible movies, but they kind of just drive through it and don't really get to see an entire action sequence building across this entire roundabout. But that's what you get in this movie. Like I said, every action sequence just takes a step forward in the insanity. And I think John Wick gets hit by a car probably like 15 times in this scene. That's his one weakness. His one weakness is getting hit by cars in this franchise, and so he's just getting beat up like crazy. But who's getting hit by more cars is all the other goons that John Wick is throwing into said cars on this roundabout. And the traffic never stops. For some reason, there's all this mayhem going around, and cars just keep on spinning around this thing. But you know what? I don't care about logic at this point in this series. It is so over the top and entertaining that this entire sequence on this roundabout even tops the street sequence and the Japan sequence that we've got earlier in this film, and it's just absolutely insane. And once John Wick is able to get out of this Frogger situation on this roundabout, he once again escapes off into this building, and then you get another sequence that even tops the roundabout sequence, where you get an incredible overhead tracking shot through this building. John Wick gets himself a shotgun with these dragon fire bullets that is just insane. Again, I can explain this stuff to you, but this action sequence throughout all of Japan that kind of weaves between all these different locations within Japan, that is also kind of bookended by the announcer, by this radio host that is basically saying where John Wick is at any given point. It is truly a beautiful and just incredibly well shot with the cinematography and the direction action sequence that takes this series to another level. And so at this point, you've been watching this Paris sequence for probably about 20 to 30 minutes long, and it's just been getting more and more insane, and John Wick finds himself at the bottom of this staircase that is about 200 steps to his final destination where he's going to do the duel. He's exhausted at this point. He's been beat up to hell at this point, and he's just looking up the staircase, and he sees these goons show up at the top of the stairs. And then you get another sequence that even tops the past two sequences that we got in Paris, because John Wick is trying to work his way up these stairs with all these goons showing up out of nowhere. You also have the tracker at this point trying to kill John Wick throughout the building, and throughout this stair sequence, he's also trying to help him at the same time, because that bounty is slowly getting higher and higher because he's getting closer to his destination, and Bill Skarsgård is getting desperate at this point. And this staircase sequence, again, the stunts and the action in this film are insane. And I think this scene alone is a reason why stunts should be a category in the Oscars, because these people that are throwing their bodies at the ground at these stairs, it is truly breathtaking to see this action and to see this commitment to these roles. And Keanu Reeves does a lot of his stuff in this film as well, and it is so incredibly impressive. And as if this scene couldn't be even more over the top and hilarious, at one point John Wick is pretty much at the top of the stairs, and this other bad guy, played by Zaror, this guy has been kind of on the tail of John Wick throughout the entire movie, and it's kind of a wonder that this guy has not died at this point, because he's gone through also some insane hits in terms of like John Wick level hits of the second movie, where you think this guy should be dead 10 times over at this point, but he's still there, and he beats up John Wick at the top of the stairs, and John slowly rolls down the entire staircase in probably like a 20 to 30 second scene where he's still rolling down those stairs. He falls down all 200 steps, and he's back at the very beginning. That was so funny to me. This movie is so incredibly entertaining, and of course Donnie Yen is at the bottom of the steps, and he tells John to get up, and they work together to get their way up those steps, because of course if Donnie Yen doesn't do this duel, his daughter's going to be endangered from the high tower, so he needs to get John Wick up these stairs. And you also have the tracker at this point, who was also, his life was spared by John Wick, because John has a very interesting way of respecting the people that he fights. In the third movie, there's those two people, they fight John Wick, and they don't kill him. They have several opportunities to kill him, but there's kind of a respect built between all these characters at a certain point. Same thing with Common's character in the second movie. He has respect for these assassins that he's going up against, even if they are trying to kill each other at any given moment. He does let some people live, and that makes an impression on the tracker character. This Mr. Nobody character ends up helping John get up these staircases, and he kind of forfeits that bounty that he's been trying to get this entire time, which gives him a lot of growth as well. I really loved the tracker throughout this entire movie. He added a lot of tension throughout the movie, and you really didn't know whether he was going to kill John or let him live. But then you finally get CAINE and John Wick at the top of the steps. They've made it through all the goons. It is now sunrise, and a beautiful shot. They are ready for their duel, and the movie ends in a very intimate way. You've had some insane action sequences from Japan to Germany to everything that was just absolutely bonkers in the entire Paris sequence, and the movie ends with a very intimate duel where they take 30 paces away from each other. They have these guns with one bullet, they point and they shoot, and they have to keep on getting closer and closer together until one of them finally falls and dies. And so you get Donnie Yen is shot in the shoulder, John is shot in the arm, and they slowly get closer and closer and closer to each other, and at one point John is shot in the gut, and he is on his knees. You think that he's about to die at the hands of Donnie Yen, but then Bill Skarsgård's character steps in, saying that he wants to do it to himself. John has basically lost the duel. He grabs one bullet for his gun, and he doesn't realize that John actually didn't shoot in that last battle, and John just shoots him directly in the head, and he is now killed. And John Wick is now redeemed in the eyes of the High Table, and he is once again free like he was in that first movie. But he was unfortunately fatally wounded in that final sequence. You get a little bit of a goodbye between Winston and him and CAINE's character, and it's a very satisfying way to end this movie. And John Wick starts to go down those stairs, but then he collapses and he dies at the ending of this film. And what I think this film did really well, and what I think the director and the makers of this series was a very smart choice in doing, was to make it not known that this was going to be the last John Wick film, because this is the finale of the John Wick series. And that was kind of shocking to me, because at the beginning of the movie, when CHARON was killed, I was thinking, wow, you've just killed off a main character that's been there since the beginning, and it really sets the stakes to a point where you think anybody can die in this film, and you think maybe John Wick can die in this film. The stakes feel so high and so intense that anybody is now expendable at this point in the franchise. And when they finally killed John Wick at the end of this movie, I felt so satisfied with his character arc through the entire thing, because again, this was a battle for his soul. If he killed Donnie Yen in this duel, he would have lost his soul. He would have killed somebody and done the thing that was done to him when his wife was killed or when his dog was killed. And so so by the ending of this movie, John Wick is not just redeemed in the eyes of the High Table, he's also redeemed in the eyes of himself, and he has once again become John. And at the end of the movie, when Winston and the king are at his gravestone, you get to see his gravestone next to his wife's gravestone, and his wife's gravestone, you just see the name Wick, and on his gravestone, you just see the name John as the camera is slowly dolling in between these two people. And I think that's a great way to showcase that he is now just John at this point. He was killed as John and not killed as John Wick, and I think that is a very satisfying way to end this character, because if you are going to end this series, again, how far are you going to go? How insane are you going to go? When are you going to end this series? When are you going to end this rampage? And I think this was the perfect way to end this series. So again, I don't think this is probably as good of a movie as that first one, because those personal stakes and just the way that movie is paced is so incredibly well, but this movie was also incredibly well paced. Again, the way it builds up these characters and how you care about Donnie Yen's character, you care about how he is trying to kill John Wick, and you're kind of rooting for him in a way because you don't want his daughter to be killed in the sequence. You're also kind of rooting for the tracker because he keeps on building up his bounty more and more and more, and when he gets to that $60 million point, you're like, hell yeah, he got to his goal. He reached his purpose in this film, and you're rooting for everybody in this film all separately, even though they're all pitted against each other. And the movie ends in a way where everybody kind of wins. The tracker learns his lesson to have a little more, I guess, respect for the people in this world. And Donnie Yen's character also gets his freedom. He also gets to go back to his daughter, and they can both live a free life. And John Wick is also free by the ending of this film, and he dies at peace. And I think that is the most important thing to hammer home with this character. He's finally at peace, and I just loved this movie. And again, the filmmakers around this film didn't say that this was going to be the last one. They said, oh, maybe I'll take a break from John Wick movies after a while, is what Chad Stahelski said last week. So I had no clue that this was going to be the ending of this series. I'm very excited for the Ballerina spinoff and the Continental spinoff TV show, but in terms of the John Wick films and the ending of this series, I think this is as good as it possibly could have been. So that is going to be my review and my thoughts on John Wick Chapter 4. I know this is a very long movie and I couldn't talk about everything in this film, so what are your thoughts on John Wick Chapter 4? What was your favorite action sequence? Again, the Paris sequence was so damn good, and there's kind of 3 different scenes within that entire sequence in Paris, but that Germany scene with that buildup of tension was just so good to me, and that character played by Scott Adkins was great, so I think that might be my favorite scene in the entire movie. But what is your favorite scene in this entire movie? Comment in the comment section down below all your thoughts on this movie. If you enjoyed this review, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this, including my weekly Mandalorian reviews that I've been doing. So again, comment down below, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. I hope to see you all in my next one.